In the quiet suburb of Oak Ridge, where trees lined the sidewalks and everyone knew their neighbor's dog's name, lived a man named Richard Monroe. He was 78 years old, retired from a long career in civil engineering, and had lived alone in the same modest two-bedroom home for over 2 decades. His wife, Linda, had passed away 14 years ago, and since then Richard had lived in silence, not in sorrow but in steady solitude. People around Oak Ridge often whispered about Richard, not because he was strange or problematic, but because he was the embodiment of independence. While most men his age had either remarried or moved in with family, Richard had chosen a different path. He remained in his home, tending to his small garden, reading books by the fire, and occasionally chatting with a mailman or waving at children riding their bikes. He wasn't lonely, at least not in the way most would assume. One summer afternoon, a young journalist named Megan Carter came to Oak Ridge on assignment. Her editor had pitched her a piece titled, "What Happens to Older Men Who Choose to Live Alone?" At first she wasn't excited. But when she heard about Richard Monroe, the man who had become somewhat of a legend in Oak Ridge, her curiosity piqued. Megan arrived with a notebook, a recorder, and a healthy dose of skepticism. She knocked on Richard's door, half expecting to be turned away. Instead, he opened the door with a warm smile and said, "You must be the young writer the neighbors have been talking about. Come in. I just brewed some fresh coffee." Inside, the house smelled like aged wood and cinnamon. Books lined the walls, pictures of a younger Richard with his late wife hung neatly in the hallway, and a soft jazz tune played on an old record player. Megan took a seat at the round wooden table near the window. Richard poured her a cup of coffee, then sat across from her. His hands folded neatly, eyes kind yet deeply aware. "So, you want to know the truth about men like me?" he said with a smile. Megan nodded. "Yes, if you're comfortable. I think people have a lot of misconceptions about men who live alone at your age." He chuckled. "They sure do." And with that, Richard began to tell his story. Not just his own, but what he'd learned over the years. The truths that surprised even him as he aged alone, without a woman beside him. "I was 32 when I met Linda," he said. "She was my compass, my best friend, and my balance. When she passed from cancer, I thought my life would collapse. But what happened next, no one prepared me for." He paused, then continued. "The first thing I learned was that living alone didn't mean being empty. In fact, it gave me the space to discover who I was without always being someone's husband or caretaker. I learned to sit in silence and enjoy it. I found joy in little things, like tending to my roses or making pancakes from scratch every Sunday." Megan scribbled notes quickly, captivated by how gently he spoke of solitude. "I also discovered," Richard continued, "that my mental strength grew sharper. You'd think living alone would make your mind dull. But no, you have to be responsible for your safety, your routine, your engagement with the world. You wake up each day and no one is reminding you to take your pills or go for a walk. You become your own reminder, and that sharpens you." He looked out the window, watching a squirrel dart across the lawn. "But here's what really surprised me, Megan," he said, turning back to her. "Society tells us that men can't age alone, that we fall apart without a woman's care. But the truth is, many of us become more emotionally open when we're alone. We talk to ourselves, we remember the people we love, we reflect. I write letters to Linda even though she's been gone for over a decade. Cry sometimes. And I laugh out loud when I remember the silly things we used to do." Megan's voice softened. "Do you ever feel lonely?" Richard nodded. "Yes, but there's a difference between being alone and being lonely. I have moments of loneliness, sure. Holidays can be tough. But I don't feel incomplete. I don't feel desperate for company. I've built a relationship with myself." He leaned in. "Do you know what else surprised me? Older men like me, we become more useful, more engaged. People think we fade into the background, but I help with the community garden. I teach engineering basics to a group of high schoolers at the local library, and I fix broken fences for my neighbors. I've become more present in my community than I ever was when I was younger and working full-time." Megan's eyes lit up. "So, You're saying there's a kind of transformation that happens? Richard smiled. Exactly. We stop being who we were told to be, and we become who we really are. And sometimes that man is softer, wiser, and even more giving. Their conversation went on for hours. Richard shared stories about the couple across the street who check on him during snowstorms, about the little girl who brings him homemade cards, and about how he had recently taken up painting. They're terrible, he laughed, but they make me happy. When Megan left that day, her heart was full. She had come looking for data, maybe even a cautionary tale. Instead, she found a man who lived with depth, peace, and a kind of quiet strength that didn't need constant companionship to flourish. In the weeks that followed, Megan expanded her research and met other men like Richard. There was James in Oregon, a retired chef who lived alone and hosted Sunday meals for local college students. And Robert in Florida, who had taken up photography and found joy capturing sunrise walks along the beach. Each man echoed what Richard had said, that aging alone wasn't a sentence. It was a choice that, for many, brought unexpected rewards. Megan's article, once titled with skepticism, was published as The Hidden Strength of Older Men Who Age Alone. Stories of self-discovery, purpose, and peace. It went viral. When she returned to Oak Ridge to deliver a printed copy to Richard, he greeted her with the same smile, this time with a twinkle of pride in his eyes. "Thank you," he said simply, "for seeing us." But Richard's story didn't end there. A few months later, he was invited to speak at a senior living conference, where he stood on stage, trembling at first, then speaking with clarity and warmth, to hundreds of seniors and their families. He spoke about redefining aging, about how solitude isn't the enemy, and about embracing a new version of manhood in the later chapters of life. His words moved many. Men in the audience cried. Women nodded in recognition. And families left with a new understanding of what it meant to grow old. Not with fear, but with intention. Back home in Oak Ridge, Richard received letters from across the country. Strangers thanking him, some sharing their own stories. He responded to every one of them, even if it took him all night. One letter came from a woman named Eleanor in Michigan. She, too, had been widowed for years, and something in Richard's story gave her hope. Over time, they began writing regularly, not romantically, but in mutual admiration, sharing recipes, favorite books, and reflections on life. Richard found joy in the simple connection, and Eleanor said it felt like breathing fresh air again. Years passed. Richard eventually slowed down. His steps were softer, his hands more fragile, but his spirit remained bright. On his 83rd birthday, the neighborhood threw him a small party in the park. Children sang, neighbors brought pie,